Cloud-first development helps your business move fast, but misconfigurations and blind spots are part of the deal. App and dev teams get the flexibility, while security teams are left with the stress of managing new risk using legacy workflows. ExtraHop RevealX provides cloud-native network detection and response, backed by cloud-scale machine learning that helps you spot threats and unify processes across hybrid environments. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. That's extrahop.com/securityweekly. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. Keep your company and products relevant, competitive, and reliable by standardizing your security framework to protect intellectual property, become a reliable business partner, and guard financial and customer information. Standards Connect is an online standards management solution from ANSI. It's standards access simplified. Standards Connect is a cost-saving, fully customizable solution for entrepreneurs and companies that spend $2,000 or more per year on standards and want to translate spend into a subscription model, want to simplify access, search, monitoring, and collaboration, or need a centralized hub of standards for multiple users at one or more locations. Get a free trial at securityweekly.com/ANSI. That's /ANSI.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian. We need your help in a survey we are running for research purposes for an upcoming webcast. Please visit securityweekly.com/5 stages of automation maturity to submit your responses to help us understand how you're doing with your automation maturity. We will share the results in a webcast in November. This year's Compass Cybersecurity Symposium is being held at Twin River Casino in Lincoln, Rhode Island on September 25th, just 2 days away. It's just 15 minutes outside of Providence. The venue has plenty of free and easy parking. Speakers include social engineering expert Chris Hadnaghi, our very own Paul Asadorian, and our previous guest, Brian Lemereau. Use the discount code SW2019 to save $20 on registration. All right, Paul, I know you were out this morning, so hopefully you got a chance to get through some articles this morning. I'm going to start with the Dear HBR. It's a podcast. So HBR does audio podcasts. It's about 35 minutes long, but it's a really interesting podcast around dealing with coworkers, how to deal with conflict with coworkers. And Dear HBR brings in, they read letters on the air, right? People who are struggling with a specific topic. And so this one, they talk about 3 different scenarios of coworker conflict and talk about kind of do's and don'ts of how you should deal with it. A couple interesting things out of this one for me. One was, have a direct conversation with the coworker that you're having conflict with. A couple of the scenarios were based on the person kind of going around the coworker to the boss and not having that kind of direct conversation with the coworker first, which kind of backfired on them, which was interesting. And so a lot of the recommendations out of this podcast are, have a conversation, kind of understand where the conflict is, think about the best way to handle that. And then if you can't resolve it, then maybe you go and have to escalate to your boss or to their boss, but don't go there first, right? Try to figure it out between the two of you. So some really good tips and tricks in that audio podcast.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Matt, is, when you work with a lot of people or even a small number of people and even with yourself, right? You're not going to like characteristics or traits sometimes about yourself, and you work to improve them, right? You're not going to like every characteristic and trait of everyone that you work with, right? You're going to find common ground. And I truly believe you got to, take people for what they are. Sometimes people make mistakes and don't judge them too harshly on it. Of course, every circumstance is different. Excuse me, but I think having a little patience and understanding in a workplace setting, realizing you're working with a pretty large number of people in the general public, and you're not going to like everyone, but it's in your best interest to get along with everyone and complete the mission, right?
Exactly. And getting along means if you have conflict, actually working with that person to resolve it and not expecting somebody else to resolve it for you.
Right. And don't expect you're always going to see eye to eye. You may agree to disagree and move on, right? And that's totally fine, right? But you all got to just, neighbors, coworkers, family, whatever, right? I think it's a pretty similar dynamic in that, you agree, disagree, and move on.
Exactly right. Which is why I brought in the second article, which talks about the ultimate list of emotions and how to control your emotions. Because if we think about conflict, it's usually related to some sort of emotion. And so I wanted to dig in a little deeper to think about, okay, so what are those emotions that we should be cognizant of, right? So you have emotions like anger and anticipation, disgust, fear, joy, sadness, surprise, and trust. Those are kind of the 8 core kind of emotions. And some of them are opposite of each other, right? And so disgust and trust, and you have some joy and sadness oppositions here, right? So you can deal with emotions on both a positive and a negative spectrum. And the article that I brought in was from Science of the People, Vanessa Van Edwards, talking about, first we have to understand what those emotions are. Then we have to figure out, when something changes in those emotions, how to understand that and then try to resolve that in a way. And I think it's a really good way to think about the previous article in these conflicts with coworkers, right? What is that emotion that's creating this conflict? Is there a way for me to understand why do I feel the way I do, and then allow me to address it in a more positive way, and make sure that I can keep those emotions in check.
Yeah, I think that's an important exercise to go through for yourself as well. I also think, understanding that people on your team, or whether the people coming on your team, you and Jeff are going to be talking about that on Wednesday, right? Like, not everyone's a fit for the team, and not everyone's skill sets and duties and tasks and what they do is necessarily 100% of the stuff that you like. Some people just aren't good at certain things, so maybe refocusing them rather than experiencing the emotion of frustration with that, why not just refocus it and realize that person's maybe just not the right person for that particular part of a role, right? So you fill it with something else. And also realize that people that are applying or leave the workplace, which happens all the time. It was early advice by folks at a job. It was like, people come and people go. And some people get the job and some people don't. That's not saying that they're a bad person. It's just saying they're maybe not the right person to work at this place right now. They are probably better off, if you're making the right decisions on hiring, which we try to do every single time. We don't always get it right, but they're probably better off working somewhere else. That their skill set, personality, demeanor, characteristics are just better suited somewhere else. You know what? They may be happier somewhere else. That employer is going to be happy with them somewhere else because it's a better fit. It's not that they're necessarily a bad person. And I also think if you think about it that way, it helps you keep your emotions in check. If only we could have this type of thinking early on in our careers. Yeah, I certainly did not always have this perspective on things, right, man? We learn.
We learn.
Yep.
Yeah, I've been through a couple of them in my transition. Sometimes
Sure.
it's not them. It's me. It's like, all right.
Sometimes you just can't work, and sometimes you just can't work with another person. There's just too much of a difference in personality, and that's okay. You don't have to be able to work with everyone, right? And you may just go work on different teams. And everyone's happier in different teams. And you know what? The business does even better when people work on different teams, right?
Yeah, and it may come down to the point where maybe it's not the right company either. Right? If you're not happy, if you don't feel you have a purpose there, you don't trust what's going on, those emotions are things that cause people to leave as well. I've had enough of those in my career, right? My criteria for jobs are different today than they were when I was 20.
Yeah.
I mean, there's way more to work than just the money side of it, right?
Yeah.
If you're not having fun, you don't believe in what you're doing, you don't trust your bosses, why would you ever go work for them in the first place? So understanding what motivates you and what emotions you want to drive out of your work life experience will help you actually probably make better choices on which companies and jobs you actually
And
work
you know why I think I can say that more confidently and give that advice to people is because oftentimes in my career, you maybe haven't seen eye to eye with someone that you've been working with, and either you go somewhere else to work or they go somewhere else to work. And it's that you really didn't dislike each other. It was just a bad fit where you were working. You were victims of circumstance, and you end up collaborating, working together in different jobs, right? And you're like, it was just that situation, that company, that role for each of you, which is a lot of factors, right? Like just didn't make it match up. And then, later on down the road, it's, all's good.
or even a different company.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah,
which is also kind of a lesson, like don't burn your bridges either. Right?
Yeah, that's true. In this industry, I don't think you can.
No, in really any industry, but this one is
true.
So
this one, like I say, we're all 1 to 2 degrees of separation in security because it's such a small community that you're only 1 or 2 degrees away.
And to your point too, Matt, sometimes people aren't just happy or are just not happy working in the role they're working in. So whoever they're working with, they are just butting heads with because they're just not happy, right? And then you may work with that same person somewhere else and get along great because now you're both happier at another job as well. So all these happen. And by no means am I pointing to any specific, if everyone's listening that I've worked with, I'm not pointing to anyone specific or a specific circumstance. So.
So I have some tips for you for your presentation on Wednesday.
Yeah.
What do you do when you're losing your audience? That never happens to you, right?
You make up no, you can see it. And no one is perfect. Look, and when you're presenting, sometimes my scores have been horrible and sometimes they've been great, right? And the only thing you can do from that is learn from it and realize what you may have done wrong. In the moment, though, that can be some quick thinking on your feet to how to get your audience back. I would say if I had to venture to guess what the best possible thing you could do if you're losing your audience would be to tell a story that relates to your subject matter and draws from your personal experience. I oftentimes try and do that early on, so I hope to maintain their attention throughout is one strategy. But if you realize, especially when you're teaching, like SANS instructors teach for 6 days at a time, there's going to be points where you may feel just from looking at people's body language, going back to previous segments on the show, that you might be losing your audience. That might be a good time to take a time out and tell a story. Now, it's important. Most of the time it should relate. There are circumstances where the students encourage it, and you're telling a story that doesn't relate, but that's what the students want. And because you're teaching for 6 days, let's be frank, like you need to mix it up a little bit. But for the most part, especially in shorter presentations, telling a story that relates to your personal experiences to the subject matter helps get the audience attention back.
Exactly.
Now, I don't know what your strategies are, what recommendations you have, but that would be first to mind.
Yeah, stories are a great way to do it because you have to get your content to relate to the audience, and stories or analogies are the best way to do that.
Yep.
So,
and have some kids and tell stories about them because most of the people in the audience, depending on your audience, but usually most of the people in the audience have kids and you instantly relate, right? But you can go to other things. Most people own a car, right? Search for common things like that to tell a story about. If you're telling a story about your esoteric basket weaving hobby, I mean, that could work. Maybe they learned something new, but I try and oftentimes to stick with things that have common ground.
Yeah, the other one is to make sure you're engaging with the entire audience. Sometimes we get a tendency to focus on a specific person or part of the room. And if you're engaged there the whole time, then the other part of the room can disengage. So one of the really hard things to do in a presentation is figure out how to engage the entire audience. And there's different ways to do it. One of the tips in this article, which, I spend a lot of time trying to do, is your movement around the stage or wherever you're presenting from, so that you're engaging with all of the audience at certain times. If you spend too much time in one spot, then that other part of the group could definitely turn off. So that's something. They talk about pace and change of your voice, both speed and volume. Pausing, I think, is a really good thing to do, especially when you want one of those key points to sink in. You say it and then you stop, and you just count like to 3 in your head, and then you continue.
Yep.
It's that pause. People's brains need to catch up sometimes, right? And so they hear it, but they haven't fully registered it, and that little pause will allow them to actually consume what you actually said and went, oh, that's interesting. That kind of grabs their attention. So it's
And
a
when
very
you get
technique.
better and practice, the more you practice, the more those pauses will just become natural.
Right, exactly. Which is what you hope for
Mhm.
ultimately if you're going to do this on a regular basis.
And easier when you've presented the same material as well.
That's true. Kind of like my one down in Nashville.
In practicing too, like you said on a previous show, Matt. Yeah, practicing is important.
Lots of practice. These next two articles are related. The first one talks about email and how it drains 5 hours of the workday. The second one is then how to set some limits around email to make you a little more productive. It was an interesting, they just happened to both pop up this week. And look, you're the poster child for this one.
Well, I mean, if you ignore email, you force people to find other ways to communicate with you that are truly motivated to get a hold of you. And that's the best email filter ever.
It's exactly right.
Notice I paused to reinforce that point?
Yes. Audience, did you hear that? Find another way to get a hold of Paul because he doesn't check his email.
Especially, I mean, if you're applying for a job, that could be, a good tip, right? It shows your motivation. Exactly.
Yeah, but what I thought was interesting, the first one was a survey by Adobe on how much time people spend on email. And the numbers are, they're massive. I mean, 5 hours of workers' time every day. And what we've seen is even though it was personal work email use is down, but the time spent in our inboxes rose from 3.3 hours to 3.4 hours. So even though we're using it less, we're still spending more time in our inboxes.
Because I think, spam and unsolicited email and all that stuff. Also, everything sends you an email now, whether it's a website, whether it's your IoT device, whether it's your cloud hosting provider. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors that can contribute to any of these statistics in here, right, based on the way that we use email. Yeah,
and millennials check their email while they're in bed, watching TV, when they're on vacation, right? So a lot more people are connected to email more of the day. And that just seems to be a trend back to our previous conversation, right? We have these things in our pockets that are phones that are connected to email. So it's really easy to check your email. I get yelled at this all the time from my wife. Stop checking your email. You're always in your email. So I'm to blame as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard because there could be any number. I mean, use your phone for everything now, right? I mean, it could be turning on or off the lights, right? Or interfacing with all your smart devices in your home, responding to something important, right? Last week, I don't know if I even told you, we've both been so busy, Matt, that we had a security incident that was totally brought upon by myself because someone forgot that the web application scanner kicked off from an account I hadn't logged into in a really long time. And so I was responding to a security event, which made for a good exercise, certainly, but totally brought on by myself. But email was critical to that incident response. Right? I got one email that said outgoing bandwidth was over a quota, and then I got another email that said or incoming was over quota. Then another email that said a different server outgoing was over quota. I'm like, oh, right? Like forensics incident response and security folks know that when you see stuff going out, that could be really bad. It could be in someone's in and sending stuff out. So that's bad. And then you wake up in the morning and you've got 3 more emails and a couple others, and you're like, what is going on? And email is critical to that. Again, I think it underscores the point. You do spend more time in email today because everyone's got an email notification system.
Exactly. So then the second article that ties into this is 6 ways to set some boundaries around email to try to help you get through that volume and better prioritize.
Yep.
Right? Because we are inundated with emails. So, use email signature disclaimers. So I think we have to update your disclaimer. If this is really important, you better find another way to get a hold of me because I'm not answering email. So we should update your email disclaimer.
And I would venture to guess that personal email use is down because personally they're using text messages or Facebook Messenger or some other type of communications mechanism, which, again, I tend to use more of. I largely believe, subconsciously even, that I get a lot less spam on text messages and in other messaging platforms, which I predict will change when we talk about phishing, right? But I think that's the reason why. Personally, you're communicating with your friends and family via other mechanisms.
Yeah, and it even says add instructions on your website or social media about about what you're going to respond to and not respond to, because that is the shift that's happening, right? People are communicating via text, via social media. So that's why you're seeing that shift. And they talk about, kind of be explicit about what you're going to respond to, talks about using autoresponders generously, right? If it's something that, you can create a rule for and people are they really need to get a hold of you, then maybe an autoresponder such that they find another way to get in touch with you would actually help.
Or maybe they don't need to get in touch with you at all. I think email, one of the things missing here is not just setting boundaries, but also, we've talked about this on the show quite a bit in the past, is taking things out of email, making email not part of your process to get everyday process things done. And largely, we've done, I think, a good job of either assigning those to different people on your team who are responding to those type of emails very well, such as generating a ticket, maybe that generates an email, or just taking it out of email entirely. Rather than sending an email to 3 different people in a chain, put that in some kind of application and go, when this happens or someone needs this, you go here and you create this, and that kicks off an automated workflow.
Yep. And if you want me to do anything, you have to send me a calendar invite, because if it's not on my calendar,
right,
I don't touch it.
But we've done this, and this will get better certainly with show notes and guest prep, rather than having the data or information that's associated with a show go around all in email. Like, let's just go, when I collect it, I'm going to go put it in the right place so it's in the process, right? Rather than it getting lost in email, which again, I don't like, because there's not a lot of tracking with email. How do I know what state it's in? How do I know if it's open, closed? Has someone looked at it or not? Sure, there's read receipts, but those largely are not accurate for a whole host of technical reasons we can cover on another show. But those reasons, I think it's important to have a strategy to take things out of email. Even a whiteboard or a stand-up meeting, taking technology out of it altogether. While I was greatly opposed to that for a long time, I've come around to that. That is often the solution. Not often, but in certain circumstances, I like it much better. And
which is one of the first meetings we'll have tomorrow when I get in studio. We'll go look at the whiteboard.
Go look at the whiteboard.
We'll see what requirements are there.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. This last article is a little scary for me. Cybersecurity confidence rattled by continued investments but small results. So Microsoft ran a survey around its global cyber risk perception survey of more than 1,500 business leaders. And the results are a little concerning. And I think it's a little bit of a wake-up call to security folks, which is why I wanted to cover it on this show. Because if we think about the audience here of the CISO and the senior level audience, this is how the business is thinking about security. Confidence in the ability to assess and understand cybercrime dropped from 18% to 9% in 2018. That we can assess and understand that. That's a little scary, right? Because we are spending more money. 2018, we spent about $114 billion in cybersecurity spending, predicted to be $124 billion this year. That was part of my keynote down in Nashville a couple weeks ago. But when you think about that for a second, we still had over 5 billion records breached in 2018. So yes, we're spending more money, but are we really seeing a drop in data breaches? And we're not. And the survey's kind of reinforcing some of those numbers. Only 11% of firms feel a high degree of confidence in their cyber resilience. 11%. And then at most, 15% of firms have some level of confidence in their supply chain and or business partner threat mitigation. Just some scary numbers. I wanted to relay because, like I said, we see the increase in spending, but we're not necessarily seeing the results. And the question is, how do we become more results oriented with the way we're spending money?
Yeah, you have to measure your investment. Is that essentially the gist of this article, right?
It's the gist of this article.
So we're pouring money into security, but we're not able to get a report that says that it had this much benefit or return on that investment in security products, processes, whatever.
Yeah, and the question I posed a couple weeks ago was, are we spending money on the right things?
Yeah.
Just because we have a line item budget for specific technology doesn't mean that that's actually moving the needle from a results perspective. And I always talk app user data. And I pose the simple question, and anybody listening, do the same exercise. How much of your budget are you spending on application security, user security, and data security? The three primary security markets that are going to transcend wherever you run your technology, on-prem, cloud, doesn't matter. But just look at those three categories. Understand how much are you spending there. Are you spending enough on the right things? And I think that's more the gist of this article is just because we're spending money doesn't mean we're spending it on the right stuff. And it may mean some reallocations of budgets in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was my beautiful
ties
articles.
into my talk for tomorrow as well.
Awesome.
Talk about the importance of DevOps, not just your software development, right? The importance of threat hunting and breach and attack simulation, which I still think is in its infancy, but I think is really something that should be on everyone's budget for reasons. Actually, it ties into the story, right? It allows you to assess the effectiveness of the controls you're putting in place, whether those are process or product or a combination of both, right?
Yeah. Are they effective? Are we spending the right money on the right stuff?
Right.
Because it doesn't appear we are.
Interesting.
Well, thank you for joining me, Paul. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you, everyone else, for listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.